What is our favorite interstellar visitor up to as it makes its closest approach to Earth? What would happen if we discovered 3i Atlas was, in fact, a craft piloted by extraterrestrial intelligence? How would the world react? I'm Chris Daly, and I'm here with Ryan Gackner.
Why does Steven Spielberg's next movie project have everyone talking? And are requests for exorcism on the rise in the US? This is Headlines from the Beyond.
All right, so let's start with some updates on 3i Atlas.
Because it's closest to Earth right now.
Right now, it is closest to Earth. So if it is, in fact, aliens and something is happening,
Turn this podcast off
turn
and
this off.
go pay attention to whatever news station is telling you what to do.
Right. So let's say a few things that have happened. And honestly, a lot of what's going on right now is we're seeing more and more images, and we're seeing the large jets and the anti-tail, and we're just seeing a lot of the same thing, but in better detail, which is great. But I'm looking forward to the best detail that we can get, the best images that we get of this thing. Unfortunately, we won't get super close-up images because it's never really coming that close, or so we think.
True.
I suppose it could change its trajectory and come closer. But at least we're getting some sort of imagery. We're also hearing a lot about the practice of this planetary defense system in both the US and Europe. It's coordinated by the UN and the International Asteroid Warning Network. So if you look on the internet, and I don't know if I recommend this or not, but a lot of folks are saying, well, this is practice run for Armageddon. Sure, why not? We are, in fact, testing things. And I will say that the other night, my husband was outside and saw something really interesting up in the sky, and it was a bunch of lights in a row, and then they disappeared. And so he perceived it maybe as part of this interplanetary defense system. Maybe it's, satellites lining up and then they blink out, whatever. Or maybe it was aliens. I don't know. I didn't get to see it because I was cooking. Anyway. Okay, so one other thing that's going on with 3i Atlas that I wanted to mention was you may have heard of NASA's MAVEN spacecraft. This is the spacecraft that is orbiting Mars, and it's been there for over a decade. It left Earth, I believe, in 2013, and so it's been there for a while. And we've had really good contact with it for the most part. Now, when it goes around the planet, it's on the far side, you don't have communication, but then when it comes back, you get communication back. And so everything's been working well. Well, back in October, 3i Atlas passed by MAVEN and Mars, and MAVEN was able to send us, some information about it. It took some pictures, that sort of thing. But now communication is dead. There is no communication with MAVEN. We've lost that entirely. Nobody knows why. NASA's trying to figure it out. And that's just interesting, and it's coincidental. And the last thing that it did was look at 3i Atlas. So that's interesting.
Spooky.
So in any case, that's what's going on with 3i Atlas. I suspect we will be getting a lot more information in the coming days and weeks, and we will have a lot of people saying we have to analyze this.
To analyze it, we have lots of data. We collected it all, and we have to analyze it. And honestly, we can't even talk too much about that because
no, because
they're the same.
When you get data, you don't analyze it immediately, and that includes scientific data, paranormal data, everything, all the data. So. Yeah, so let's talk about some hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Because that's fun.
Yes.
So let's talk about what might happen if this were actually extraterrestrial. And the more interesting scenario, of course, is that this is aliens.
Yes.
Not just that it's space junk or whatever. So let's talk about that first. How would the average person react to this? Well, that depends, obviously, on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But one of the most important things it depends on is, are these aliens just simply flying by?
Right. You guys are not worth anything. Goodbye.
Yeah, I don't want, we're passing by. We're seeing if anything interesting is happening there. It's not.
Some interesting things, but nothing we want a part of.
We're going to continue on to some other planets. That's one scenario. But what if they actually came here? And, we had to interact with extraterrestrials? And I know there's a lot of people that are saying that this has already happened.
Right. Of course. We mean explicit You can't ignore it. It's on the news.
Yeah.
It's not being hidden by a government or a non-government entity. It is, we know that
Right.
they have arrived.
And that I think is a very interesting scenario.
Mhm.
And it's been played out in Hollywood numerous
Many
times.
times.
I personally really enjoyed that most recent movie, Don't Look Up.
Yeah, Don't Look Up, which wasn't extraterrestrial,
But it was
played with similar themes.
it played with similar themes, and I thought it was really interesting. And I thought it told us a little bit about what might
How people might
how
react
people might react.
or not.
Contactee people or abductee people, when they talk, suggest that aliens might be trying to save us from ourselves.
Mhm.
And maybe that's what they would be doing in this case.
Yeah.
So they would be offering us an enlightened perspective on how to treat the world and each other. I find that literature interesting
It's different.
because to me, if those kinds of things were happening to me and I realized that they were happening, I don't feel like I could get to that, enlightenment.
So a lot of that comes out of literature from the early 90s, which we're going to talk about in an upcoming episode, where we deal with kind of what would happen anthropologically and kind of how we would react to this as a discipline, the arrival of extraterrestrial life and interactions with it. But a lot of this is coming out of research from the early 90s with hypnotic regressions of contactees and a lot of mostly abductees. There is some disagreement among those researchers who were doing that during that time. And so there is a
some of that
thought.
disagreement is actually the people themselves, the contactees and abductees
100%.
themselves too.
Yeah, 100%. And there's some questions I have about the data collection there, but I'm going to save that for when we actually dig deep into that research. But there is one perspective among this community that suggests that aliens are coming here either to actually save us from ourselves and our destruction of the planet and our ultimate destruction of the species. And also this idea that they're here to sort of expand our consciousness and our understanding of our place within not only the ecology of the Earth, but also our place in the universe. And so that's a more sort of, in my opinion, a rose-colored glasses take on the abductee phenomena. But it is one take out there in terms of how people might react, or how aliens coming to Earth and their temperament when they're here might impact the way that we react or don't.
And Hollywood does have some examples of that, but I think far more examples in Hollywood are destruction.
Yes.
Independence Day being
Independence Day.
Clear example of that.
Yep.
So I think, we've been primed for one of those two scenarios that essentially aliens are going to come here and destroy us, or that there's going to be some sort of enlightenment. Now, if you ask Avi Loeb about it, he says that any extraterrestrial race coming here would be very, very technologically advanced, which
would have to be by default.
Have to be by default. Yep. But he's saying that anyone that technologically advanced, these are scientists, and so they're going to have this more scientific understanding and not want to just destroy us. They're going to want to explore, they're going to want to do those sorts of things. This is an area that I don't necessarily agree with him on. I think there's a lot of scientists out there who are not super enlightened, and And I also think there's a lot of government officials, not just on this planet, maybe on other planets too, who might use science to further a different end.
Yes, which we will talk about in this upcoming episode.
Right. So what do you think about what would happen? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that I think if extraterrestrials arrived on the planet and there was no way that anyone could be like ignoring it, right? So we have a scenario where it's on the news. It's, I'm thinking like District 9, Arrival.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Those movies. It's everywhere. You can't get away from it. I think a lot of people would kind of freak out because it triggers an ontological crisis to a degree for, I think, many people, right? In the sense that it really shatters any idea that we have about ourselves in the universe to a degree, right? If you're someone who thinks about this stuff all the time and you're open to the possibility of extraterrestrial life, and it's probably not that earth-shattering, but I think for the average person who doesn't think about this stuff all the time, suddenly you have to think about it.
I'm not the average person. I do think about this a lot. It would still be earth-shattering.
It's still And so I think for many people, I think we would have, instances of sort of, I guess we can call it mass hysteria. I think a lot about the way people on Doomsday Preppers are portrayed. I think that we would
Absolutely.
have a lot of that. All of those people would feel very vindicated, I think. But I think, we'd see a lot of economic upheaval. So I think the markets would get really weird. I think we'd probably see people trying to do bank runs and things like that.
Banks shutting down
Banks shutting down because of that. We'll talk a little bit more about how we think governments might react, and there are some, well, there are some sort of criteria or guidelines for that, that we'll talk about in a second. But I think, we would be in a situation that I think would not be all that dissimilar from the COVID lockdowns to a degree, in terms of like shelter in place orders and things like that. I think, there would be this effort to keep people from, clearing the shelves and doing all the things that people did as COVID, took over our
And
lives.
some of it would go straight to martial law in certain
Yeah,
locations around the
places,
globe.
for sure.
That's what
for
you
sure.
have. It's not, you mentioned COVID. The other thing that comes to my mind is back during the Cold War, get under your desk.
Yeah,
And the nuclear war isn't going to do anything to you. What?
The nukes won't hurt you.
The nukes won't hurt you under your desk. Well, actually, they will.
Yes.
And I think we'd see similar things like that, this sort of placating. It'll be fine.
It'll be okay, yeah.
But the reality is you'd see a lot of placating, a lot of trying to make people feel like it was okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, to get at, these questions of whether or not extraterrestrial or non-human intelligences would come here to basically wipe us out of existence, I think says a lot more about us than it does about these hypothetical intelligences to a degree. I think there's a lot of our anxieties around extraterrestrial visits to Earth are kind of baked into our understandings of our interactions with other cultures that are different from
That's
us.
what we can do.
And our history around that is not particularly great.
No, not great. But it also, the reason we do that is because that's all we can do.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it is our one frame of reference, right? We don't have any other reference.
So we use ourselves as a frame of reference. And so I think thinking about what would happen if aliens were to come here and what we think they would be like tells us more about what we think about ourselves than anything
100%.
else. And that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's not a good feeling. Yeah.
It's not good. Because if we look at human history, and I know you love talking about colonialism, so I'll let you talk about colonialism, but it's not great.
Yeah, you can think about all the examples that we have of societies, whether they be European or otherwise, interacting with each other for the first time. Oftentimes, those relationships are very one-sided. They're exploitative by varying degrees, and the outcomes of many of those are not very amicable for every party involved.
Look at things happening in the world right now.
Yeah, exactly. You can look at current events. There's many that we could list, right, that suggest that, when two societies run up against each other that are different, and that's what we do with other human groups, right? And so if we were to take the human out of this equation and suddenly we have another entity that is not us, how would we react to that? And how would it maybe react to us? And that's...
Well, look at how we respond to non-human organic life on the planet.
Right, exactly. We're not exactly the best all the time, right? I think for me, one of the most interesting conversations to be had around the arrival of extraterrestrials on Earth for the average person is this sort of theological implications of what does this mean for our place, our sense of place in the universe? And I think to some degree, it would really reshape the way that we think about ourselves, particularly for folks who are religious, right? And we have examples of this in the past with UFO religions, which are a thing, actually. So I'm going to put on my religious studies hat just for a second. There's a rich history of religious movements where the existence of or communication with extraterrestrials is a core part of their belief system. And these go back to even into the 1950s, which kind of makes sense, the Cold War era. Also, at the same time, we have this proliferation of ideas about UFOs. is happening at the same time. And so we've got things like the Aetherius Society in the 50s, as well as the Unarius Academy of Science. This is where we get the idea, if you've heard people talk about the idea of space brothers as aliens being our space brothers, that kind of is rooted in these 1950s.
This is the 50s, right after Roswell.
Correct. Right after Roswell, heart of the Cold War, lots of weird things are happening in the world. But we also have some more contemporary ones. Realism is still a really somewhat popular UFO religion that started in the 70s. Also, if you're familiar at all with Heaven's Gate, they count as a UFO religion, and they were as recent as 1997. And some scholars even put Scientology into this camp because the sort of the origin story of Scientology is rooted in this idea of like interplanetary, interstellar war, even though the sort of nuts and bolts of Scientology practice aren't really tied up in communicating with extraterrestrials or
it's still
otherwise.
Part of the,
it's still definitely part of the belief system.
Yeah.
And there's a couple really good videos that we linked in the show notes from another creator that I really like called Religion for Breakfast. He has two really interesting videos about sort of UFO religions themselves and also what would happen perhaps if extraterrestrials were to arrive and how that might reshape religion.
But it's interesting, even with just what's going on now with 3i Atlas coming through, a lot of religious leaders around the world are talking about the possibility for extraterrestrial life. And one of the things that keeps coming up is religions all across the world are saying things like, well, no, this wouldn't change us at all. Not at all. We've always said that this could be out there. Really?
Well, I think for some religious systems, the existence of extraterrestrial life is more compatible than it is for others, for sure.
But even the ones where you don't think it's that compatible, they're saying that, oh yeah, because our religion is human focused and it doesn't all those other folks. And so, of course they could be out there and they could have their own gods, or maybe our God created them too, but we don't have to worry about that. Or, it's just, it's interesting how you see, we don't even have proof at this
jumping
point.
Through hoops, yes.
But it's automatically this like, no, we're good because we have to preserve our faith. And I understand that.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to watch some of those things happening.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we think. Those are kind of our ideas about how the average person might react. We'd love to hear from our listeners to know how you think you would react, or the people in your life. So blow us up on social media about all of that when this episode drops. Shifting gears a little bit, how do we think scientists would react? Now, when we were researching for this episode, I was surprised by what I found because there actually is a protocol, and I after I found it, I was like, oh, this kind of makes a lot of sense. A bunch of nerds decided we need some rules, right? And so you've heard us talk on the podcast about SETI, and this Declaration of Principles for Activities Following the Detection of Extraterrestrial Intelligence is what is referred to as the SETI First Protocol. And so this was created, it's actually not that new. It was created by the SETI Permanent Committee of the International Academy of Astronautics, and it's undergone a series of revisions, most recently in 2010. But most interestingly for the podcast today, the extra news piece you're getting is they're actually in the process of revising it right now. If you look in the show notes, there's an article from earlier this month talking to the committee chair, Michael Garrett, who's a radio astronomer, about their plans for revising and reviewing and renewing it, including their anthropologist that's a part of their committee, Catherine Denning. She's an archaeologist by training, studies the social and ethical aspects of space exploration, and broadly part of social science called science and technology studies, which is really kind of an interesting field if you're not familiar.
And that's interesting to me that her training is as an archaeologist.
It is interesting to me because if you read her bio and ignore the word archaeologist, I would never have thought she was.
That's interesting to me. But
and so they're currently working on this, and they plan to vote on it and present it to the public at the International Astronautical Congress in Turkey next year. So we'll keep you posted on that, and when they release the new one, we'll be sure to point out which ones have changed and what the updates are. And so this was developed back in '85, updated in 2010. It was approved by the International Academy of Aeronautics Board of Trustees. This is why I kept transposing aeronautics and astronautics. There's lots of abbreviations here, folks. And the International Institute of Space Law, which, yes, that is in fact a thing that does exist in the world, as well as the International Astronomical Union. Now, Chris, what is in the SETI first protocol?
Well, what's really interesting to me is it kind of just follows standard guidelines for science.
It does. It really does.
It really does. So it's not anything earth-shattering.
Right.
And that was the most interesting piece of this. As I read through it, I'm like, well, isn't that what we're supposed to do with all
duh.
science? So,
yes.
So let's talk about that. So the first piece of it is that searching is going on. SETI's looking for things. So SETI experiments should be conducted transparently, and its practitioners will be free to present reports on activities and results in public and professional fora. They will also be responsive to news organizations and other public communications media about their work. So this is talking about whatever's going on right now, at other times. And so, well, it just says SETI.
It does. It just says SETI. This is the SETI first protocol,
right?
Not
so
the everybody.
Okay, so maybe SETI has been really open, but
looking at you, NASA.
It's interesting. Yeah. That is the first thing they say, and that is something we're supposed to be doing in all of science. I mean, science is supposed to be transparent. We're supposed to let people know what it is we're doing. We shouldn't be hiding in the shadows doing covert things.
Right.
So the next thing is handling candidate evidence. So if there's possible evidence, what do you do with it? So in the event of a suspected detection of extraterrestrial intelligence, the discoverer, it's singular, which it never is.
It is, yeah. It's never just one person.
Will make all efforts to verify the detection. Good. Using the resources available to the discoverer and with the collaboration of other investigators, whether or not signatories to this declaration. Okay, really? You can't make anybody else do anything.
Oh, you're giving it away though. Don't spoil don't spoil what we're going to say at the end of this.
Such efforts will include, but not be limited to, observations at more than one facility and or by more than one organization. There is no obligation to disclose verification efforts while they're underway. That kind of goes against number one, but okay.
A little bit, yes.
And there should be no premature disclosures pending verification. Inquiries from the media and news organizations should be responded to promptly and honestly.
We're analyzing the data. That's the response.
That's the response.
That's the response.
So information about these possible signals or other detections, things that they learn, should be treated in the same way that any scientist would treat provisional laboratory results. The Rio scale or its equivalent, they're going to have to add the Loeb scale in here.
Yeah.
Should be used as a guide to the import and significance of candidate discoveries for the benefit of non-specialist audiences. Okay. We'll just keep talking through this because there's so many things odd about this. Remember, this is the SETI protocol, and they're telling other people what they're going to be doing.
Well, we'll get there. Get there in a second. We'll get there.
All right. So confirmed detections. If the verification process confirms by the consensus of the other investigators involved and to a degree of certainty judged by the discoverers to be credible, whatever that means. So if the verification process confirms through this process that a signal or other evidence is due to extraterrestrial intelligence, the discoverer shall report this conclusion in a full and complete open manner to the public, the scientific community, and the Secretary General of the United Nations. The confirmation report will include basic data, the process and results of the verification efforts, any conclusions and interpretations, and any detected information content of the signal itself. A formal report will also be made to the International Astronomical Union, the IAU. So all data necessary for the confirmation of the detection should be made available to the international scientific community through publications. Doesn't say peer reviewed.
It doesn't. Publications,
meetings, conferences, and other appropriate means. They're going to have to update that too because there's a lot more ways that we do that now.
Yeah, definitely.
The discovery should be monitored. I like that.
Keep looking at it. Don't look away.
Yeah. Any data bearing on the evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence should be recorded and stored permanently to the greatest extent feasible and practical in a form that will make it available to observers and to the scientific community for further analysis and interpretation. This is that open data idea. Again, this is very much what we're supposed to do in science anyway, with the exception of we don't report to certain boards. We report to just everybody. If the evidence of detection is in the form of electromagnetic signals, Observers should seek international agreement to protect the appropriate frequencies by exercising the extraordinary procedures established within the World Administrative Radio Council of the International Telecommunication Union. I don't know who they are.
Well, and now, so I think I think that this specific piece in this protocol is actually because we've detected some signals in the past
Yes.
that we have mistaken for extraterrestrial or interstellar communication of some variety, but then come to find out actually it was something totally earthly that we just misidentified.
But good to know there's someone to do that.
There's lots of people, lots of unions and boards and all councils and all.
Yeah, they're there ever. I guess, there is hierarchy and everything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so post-detection. So we've detected, we've analyzed, we're saying this is what it is. Post-detection. A post-detection task group under the auspices of the IAA SETI Permanent Study Group has been established to assist in matters that may arise in the event of a confirmed signal, and to support the scientific and public analysis by offering guidance, interpretation, and discussion of the wider implications of the detection. So there's already a group who's going to tell us what it all means.
Correct. I mean, scientists like to do that. So that's
all right. So response to the signals in the case of confirmed detection of a signal. Signatories to this declaration, what I'm reading, will not respond without first seeking guidance and consent of a broadly representative international body, such as the United Nations. So that's all interesting.
Yes, and that sounds all well and good, right? You feel very confident. You're like, okay, there are some procedures to do, there are steps to follow. Excellent. But it's kind of not as nice as it sounds, in the sense that none of this is technically part of international law, meaning nobody actually has to follow it.
This is SETI saying this is what we think should be happening.
Right. And this goes so far as statements from the chair of SETI's Post-Detection Science and Technology Task Group. That's the task group that was just mentioned in this protocol. Paul Davies, who's an English physicist, and also works on the advisory council for METI, which is Messaging Extraterrestrial Intelligence. He's quoted in 2012 as saying, quote, "The protocol is very boring and tedious prose. It calls for people to behave in a responsible way and to refrain from responding without consultation. It calls for involving governments and scientific bodies and other things that might not actually happen in practice. You can imagine that if this happens for real, it's likely to turn into a media circus. It would be the biggest story of everybody's career, and everyone would want to be first." So you can feel confident only to a certain degree that this would actually happen, I guess.
And that's where we go back to, this is very much like science. This is making the assumptions that everyone's going to want to work together to figure out what's going on and to appropriately represent it to the public. And I go back to Three Eye Atlas.
Right.
Is everyone working together on this? No.
Not really.
In fact, we have one guy who's very vocally saying, like, I think this might be something interesting, we should look at it. And the rest of the scientific community is like, nope, you're wrong. I see the same thing potentially happening in any other circumstance. And so, it's nice to have these things written down, I guess.
Sure.
Just to be able to point to things and say, look what we did wrong.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But we all know that in science in general, this kind of stuff just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have stopped the HIV pandemic so early on if this kind of stuff had happened. Yep. We could have stopped COVID much earlier on if this kind of thing had happened. The reality is that in science, we don't do this. We are all, I don't want to say everybody's out for themselves, but in a sense they are. The reality is that, there is competition.
Yeah, that among scientists. The structure itself is built in such a way that even if you are not a naturally competitive person, you have to compete to a certain degree within the scientific community to, protect your own job and
to get funding,
to
get published,
right.
To get tenure.
Right. Exactly.
We could talk a lot about tenure.
And so there are there are definitely some open questions about how compatible addressing something like the arrival of extraterrestrials or even just the detection of an extraterrestrial signal is to the makeup of the scientific community today.
And notice that then the information ultimately goes to a government organization, the UN, or I would argue if one particular country finds information, they're going to go to their government first.
Of course they are. Of course.
So whatever government that is.
Yeah.
And there's really only a couple in the world that would be likely candidates, but there's more than one.
Yeah.
Once that information gets funneled into government, it changes what the narrative is going to be, no matter what the scientists said. So even if the scientists followed all of these things, once you have government getting involved, they're going to do things to try to protect their own people and not others necessarily. That things change once the government gets involved. And so once that happens, all of this really doesn't matter anymore.
And so that raises the question of how do we think governments might react? And we have some clues to this. According to Nicholas Hedman, who is was the former executive director of the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, another thing that actually exists, quote, there are no international agreements or mechanisms in place for how humanity would handle an encounter with extraterrestrial intelligence, end quote. And we have a whole article interviewing him that's in the show notes, gives you more detail around that. But essentially what Chris is saying here is that, we don't know what would happen because governments don't necessarily have, I mean, we know that they don't work well together much of the time. And so it's probably safe to assume that they would continue not working well together if ETs arrived. And I think it's likely that probably see instances of more powerful countries or governments trying to, sort of align themselves with the ETs or try to overpower the ETs or whatever that is, right? And I think, when I was thinking about this, I had this thought in my mind that was like, well, maybe we actually already know the answer to this question. Because if you've watched Age of Disclosure, you know that we might in fact be living the answer to this question already. If the arrival of extraterrestrial life isn't this big, spectacular Hollywood-style event, then they probably wouldn't say much of anything at all. And
scientists would get involved, but they would all
be signing NDAs, and they'd probably be a lot of scientists that aren't working in academia either. These would be scientists that are working in private industry.
Yeah.
And so
already employed by the government,
right?
With the idea that this kind of thing could happen.
Could happen, exactly. Yeah.
So I think once you have something happening in reality and it's not a theoretical, it's handled by the people in power. And so it depends on who's in power and what they decide to do with it. Is it possible that governments could come together with the idea of, fighting a common enemy? That is possible. I do think the idea of common enemies does work sometimes. But I don't think everybody would see them as an enemy necessarily. I mean, I guess if Independence Day type of thing happened, sure, but
maybe. But even in Independence Day, you had people like, I remember the scene where it's like the craft over New York City, people are on the roof and they're like, beam me up,
Right.
And so I think if we don't know, and I think not to fearmonger, but if a technologically advanced civilization sent a craft to the planet with nefarious intentions, we'll call them that, I am skeptical that we would be able to respond in any sort of way that would actually save us at all, really. I mean, honestly, if they're that technologically advanced, that they can come across space, I think we're probably cooked at that point. So who knows?
Unless Avi Loeb is right.
Which is possible.
And there are,
Which is possible.
Scientists who don't think about things like destruction.
So our hope is that the spacecraft is full of nerds. That's right. That's the hope.
That would be great.
So what do you think would happen if we found not necessarily extraterrestrials themselves, but evidence of their existence?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a more likely scenario, or I should say a scenario that is more likely to be publicized.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we may be living the age of disclosure, and we might be. But if we were to find space junk, something that somebody sent out there, like all the junk flying around in our atmosphere, if we were to find stuff that somebody left behind, that's evidence of another technologically advanced civilization. Or maybe it would be a spacecraft that is not manned by a carbon-based or That's
A
the wrong
life
word. A life form.
life form.
A life form. Well, but is artificial intelligence a life form?
No.
Ooh.
No. My anthropological opinion on that is no.
Okay.
And I'm
Well,
confident in saying that.
I could see very likely scenarios where any intelligent species sends something out and they have artificial intelligence
Sure.
manning
Running the craft.
right.
Sure.
And so we could find something like that. You know, maybe then we have Alexa take over. I don't know.
Put me in, coach.
So what would happen there? I don't think the same response would happen on Earth. I actually think there would be much less of the over the top kinds of reactions. I think there would still be arguments. You know, people would be saying, well, is this really, or is it just something that, you know, China sent up there?
Sure. Yeah.
Because we like to do that.
We do.
We like to blame it on
the adversary of the month.
Right. Right. Exactly. So what do you think governments would do?
I mean, I think if we go with what happened, what is in Age of Disclosure, and we take that with a grain of salt, I think more than likely they would probably be, you know, doing, you know, two things: throwing lots of money into defending ourselves from whatever this thing is, and probably trying to reverse engineer it, you know, and trying to figure out what is this thing and how can I learn to use it myself and recreate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense to try to reverse engineer.
Well, we have examples of that
right
already, you know, terrestrial examples, but, you know, examples nonetheless.
Right. It makes sense to try to do that. I don't know if they would throw a bunch of money into science to go try to find whoever these folks are.
Yeah, currently I would say I have limited faith that would happen, but I would like that to happen.
But I don't think that is what would happen. I think the money would go towards defense.
Yeah.
And I think the money would go towards reverse engineering. But I don't.
We sell this.
How can we sell this? I don't think it would go towards the pure science sorts of aspects of it. And I think in the scientific community, you would still have everybody arguing because that's just what happens. You know, it's interesting to read the scientific literature. So much of it is one person arguing with somebody else. It just
so much, yes.
And
there
it's
are like some really epic, like back and forth arguments in the history of anthropology that I love.
That's true in every field, and it's kind of ridiculous, to be perfectly honest.
It's ridiculous, but it's also kind of fun.
It can be fun to read, but I don't know.
It's fun.
I don't get into the theoretical
stuff.
Come
on, it's fun.
So I'm a much more applied person.
Come on, we like you. Go look up some Binford debate stuff if you're interested.
Oh, I've read it.
It's fun. It's just fun. It's a lot of fun.
But what about the average person?
I think for the people that are already steeped in interest in UFOs and UAPs and extraterrestrials and all of the above, I think many of those people think this already happened.
Right.
You know, I mean, like, we could just look at like Roswell and stuff, and the way people talk about Roswell and other craft, you know, or other examples of crashes and whatever else. I think a lot of people, there's a good chunk of those people that already think we've had this happen.
Right.
And I think for the average person who's not in those circles, it doesn't really change much of anything. You know, I mean, you still got to go to work the next day and, you know, send in your taxes and do all of that, right?
Yeah, nothing is stopping taxes.
Yeah. Sorry. And so, you know, I think a lot of people would be, you know, kind of just like, all right, well, that's cool, and move on. You know, I think us nerds would obsess over it, but
I think other people would do more doomsday prepping.
Yeah, I think we have probably a renewed season of National Geographic's Doomsday Preppers, which I can't say I'd be upset about.
But I do think, you know, there would be some people who just have that response of, you know, the world is ending and
you gotta go build my school bus bunker.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be to the degree if we actually had contact with extraterrestrials, but I still think some people would respond that way. I want to believe that type of discovery would make some more people interested in science and going into studying some of this stuff.
Yeah, I would like to see that. You know, I wonder about, you know, all this talk around 3i Atlas, if we're going to have a sort of Avi Loeb effect like we had with.
We are actually. If you look, you know? One thing that he's doing is he posts. Not every day, but most days he's posting. He actually includes some of the emails that he's getting.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
From kids around the world and from non-scientists talking about how interested they are in science now, and, you know, people saying, I'm going to go into this field now. And I think that's awesome. So even if you disagree with him, how great is it that he's inspiring people to go into astrophysics?
Yeah, I
think that's awesome. Yeah. And he talks about astroarchaeology. Maybe he'll inspire some people to go into anthropology and archaeology. You know, I think the more we can do that, the better. because we need some people in these fields who think differently.
Yeah. Or open to thinking differently.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to make any new breakthroughs if we don't have people who think outside the box. That's when the breakthroughs happen. So I would hope that any of this would start to bring more people into the sciences.
Yeah.
So what else is going on?
So the teaser trailer for Steven Spielberg's upcoming film Disclosure Day has everyone in a buzz, with a star-studded cast including Emily Blunt, Josh O'Connor, Colin Firth, and Coleman Domingo. Little is still known about the film's plot.
It's an interesting trailer.
We
we
both watched it, and I feel like we didn't learn that much.
True.
I want to see the full trailer, but with this teaser, there's lots of questions about what this film actually is about still. So there's questions about, is Hollywood just riding this wave of disclosure hysteria? Or will Disclosure Day have the same impact on public discourse surrounding ETs like ET and Close Encounters of the Third Kind? I mean, I'm excited to see Spielberg return to sci-fi, and we'll have to wait until later today to see the full trailer, as it is slated to release ahead of Avatar's Fire and Ash. But we'll have to wait until June to find out about the whole film.
I'm excited. It could be a great movie. I hope it is.
One other story to mention today is that there was recent CNN reporting that suggests that exorcism requests are actually on the rise in the United States.
This doesn't shock me at all.
It doesn't shock me too much either, but it's an interesting bit of news nonetheless. So CNN reached out to all 196 Catholic dioceses and archdioceses in the United States. And of those contacted, only 48 responded.
That doesn't shock me at all either.
Not a totally great response rate. I'm not going to run the numbers, but it's not good. Of those that responded, 25 dioceses, so just over 50%, reported an increase in recent years for exorcism requests. 15 reported no increase, and 8 said that they didn't keep data on the request.
Okay, that's bull.
We have some questions about, but
they keep the data because the Pope has said that every diocese or archdiocese should have an exorcist.
Yes.
By the way, they didn't all listen. They don't all have them. And in some cases they have them, but they don't really use them very much.
That request was made a minute ago by the Pope, like a couple of popes ago.
Popes ago, yeah.
But
it doesn't surprise me,
yeah.
That requests for exorcism are on the rise. And I think, we'll be doing an episode sometime next year focused more on demonology, exorcism, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Because it is not simply a Catholic or Christian phenomenon.
It is not. But the Catholic Church has really started training more exorcists and is getting more involved in this, something that they, for a while had kind of backed off. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the fact that the church is talking about it more means that more people are going to actively interact with them and things like that. But it also doesn't surprise me because there's a lot of bad stuff out in the world.
Yeah,
and so the idea of blaming it on demons, not bad.
Not the worst.
Not the worst idea. So interesting. We're going to follow that more. And again, we will have some episodes focusing more in that realm.
Yeah. Well, that's the news for today. I want to say thank you for joining us as we wave goodbye to 3i Atlas and look ahead to all the latest paranormal news. This has been Headlines from the Beyond.